All right, so let's talk about Rob Schneider. You probably know him as a comedian, right? Well, lately, he's become one of Hollywood's most outspoken critics. So what's the story there? How did that happen? We're going to dive into a recent, really in-depth interview with him to unpack his whole take on what he sees as a divided America, everything from the media to Hollywood, and even the basic idea of personal freedom.
So for Schneider, it all kind of kicks off with this really tense moment. He tells this story about being at an SNL reunion, and none other than Robert De Niro comes up to him. And according to Schneider, De Niro is not happy. He asks him point blank, "How can you support that schmuck?" Talking, of course, about his support for Donald Trump.
Now, you'd expect a big blow-up, right? But Schneider says he did something, well, completely unexpected. Instead of arguing, he just looked at De Niro and said, "I love you." And he just kept repeating it. And apparently, it totally diffused the whole situation. For Schneider, that one little encounter is a perfect snapshot of what he thinks has gone so wrong in America.
Okay, so that personal story is really the jumping-off point for his much bigger argument. This is where we get into his diagnosis for the whole country. He basically says the nation is sick, and he blames two main things: this out-of-control tribalism and a media that, in his view, just makes money by pouring gasoline on the fire.
So what does he mean by tribalism? Well, he describes it as this state where logic just goes out the window. It's like you've developed what he calls a pathological empathy, but only for your own team, your own tribe. And at the same time, you have zero empathy for anyone who thinks differently.
And who's feeding all this division? Well, Schneider points the finger straight at the media. He even brings up Noam Chomsky's old idea of manufacturing consent. He calls the press a giant wrecking hole, just smashing its narrative into everyone's heads and then moving on, never even looking back at the wreckage it creates.
And he argues that you can see this bias happening in real time. Just think about it. He says, look at how the exact same event gets covered. Say an economic report comes out. Depending on which party is in the White House, the headlines can paint two totally different realities. For one side, it's a huge success. For the other, it's a total disaster.
And to back this up, he gives some specific examples of what he considers media distortion. He talks about the Kyle Rittenhouse case, arguing the media narrative was the complete opposite of what was on video. He also mentions the claim that CNN altered a picture of Joe Rogan to make him look sick. And he points to politicians who, he says, won't even admit that the government was involved in censorship on social media platforms.
All right, so from the media, Schneider brings the conversation right back home to his own backyard, Hollywood. He argues this whole culture of division isn't just some abstract political thing. He believes it's causing a total meltdown in the entertainment industry.
And his prediction here is, wow, it's a big one. He straight up claims the major movie studios are basically destroying themselves from the inside out. He says that in 5 years, those iconic studio lots, Sony, Warner Brothers, they're not going to be making movies. They're just going to be valuable real estate.
And he ties this whole idea of industry decay directly to his own career. Schneider's convinced he was blacklisted. He traces it all the way back to a tweet he made in 2016 that got a lot of heat. He says that tweet, plus his very public stance against mandates during the pandemic, while that was pretty much it. The door to starring roles in movies, he claims, slammed shut for good.
But, for Schneider, this isn't really just about politics or his career. When you boil it all down, it comes to this one core principle that he calls his line in the sand for freedom, and that is bodily autonomy.
Now, what's really interesting is where this conviction comes from. He built his whole argument on a pretty alarming statistic. He brings up this 2013 NIH study that claimed 54% of kids in America have at least one chronic illness. To him, that number is a massive red flag, and it's really at the heart of his entire fight.
And this is why he calls it his absolute line in the sand. His logic is actually pretty straightforward from his point of view. If the government can make you inject something into your own body, what can't they do? He sees it as the last refuge of your freedom. And once that's gone, he argues all the other freedoms don't really mean anything.
Okay, so he's laid out all the problems as he sees them. So what's the solution? Well, Schneider does offer a call to action, what he sees as the prescription for getting freedom back.
And where does he look for inspiration? The American Revolution, actually. He makes this point that only about a third of the colonists were actually for independence. So his message is pretty clear. You don't need everyone on board to make a huge change. All it takes is a determined, courageous minority.
So his path forward really comes down to 3 basic steps. Number 1, speak your mind. You got to have the courage to use your First Amendment right, even if it costs you something. Number 2, take responsibility. Be accountable for your own health, your own freedom. And number 3, challenge your certainties. Don't just accept things because you've always believed them.
And he really digs into this idea of free speech. He says it's not just about your right to speak, it's about everyone else's right to listen, even to bad ideas, so they can make up their own minds. He argues that when the government steps in to act like a nanny, trying to protect you from what it calls dangerous ideas, well, that's the end of a free society.
So ultimately, he leaves us with this really provocative thought. He suggests that for a society to be healthy, to be vibrant and innovative, it all depends on our willingness to question everything, especially the stuff we're most certain about. It's really a challenge, isn't it? A challenge to break out of our little tribes and actually start thinking for ourselves.